New audio featuring Republican Senator Lindsey Graham on the day of the Capitol riots shows that he actually isn't very honest about who he purports to be publicly, because behind the scenes, he was really rooting for Joe Biden, especially after the riots took place. So this is never before heard audio. It was just released through CNN. Apparently, after the riots had taken place, Lindsey Graham had an interview with Jonathan Martin, one of the New York Times reporters who's releasing a book. And so what did he say in that audio? Take a listen.
We'll actually come out of this thing stronger. Moments like this reset. It'll take a while. People will calm down. People are, I don't want to be associated with that. This is a group within a group. And what this does, there'll be a rallying effect for a while where the country says we're better than this.
And Biden will help that, right?
Yeah, totally. He'll be maybe the best person to have, right? I mean, how bad can you get it with Joe Biden?
So Jonathan Martin specifically asks him, well, Biden would help, right? Yeah, he'd be the best person to lead the country. That is what Lindsey Graham had said during that interview, an answer that we had never heard before until today. And I think that it is indicative of what you see among many members of the Republican Party. Individuals who are so terrified of Donald Trump and their own base that they will lie to the American people. They will purport to be individuals that don't actually believe the things they're saying. And I love it because it wasn't just that audio. If you can recall, after the riots took place, Lindsey Graham was one of the Republican senators who gave a passionate speech. I mean, Mitch McConnell condemned Trump and his incitements of violence, and Lindsey Graham had his own impassioned speech to give. Let's watch that video, and then I'll give you more.
It is over. The final thing, Joe Biden. I've traveled the world with Joe. I hoped he lost. I prayed he would lose. He won. He's the legitimate president of the United States. I cannot convince people, certain groups, by my words, but I will tell you by my actions that maybe I, above all others in this body, need to say this. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are lawfully elected and will become the president and the vice president of the United States on January the 20th.
So as you can see, Lindsey Graham was willing to give up the act, especially the day that the riots took place. He saw firsthand, as every other politician who had enabled Trump had seen that day, that maybe paying lip service to the more extreme elements of our party is not such a great idea. There are actual ramifications that result from that. And I have no doubt that every single Republican member of Congress who experienced the riots that day were terrified. I mean, you have them, essentially having to evacuate the building, go to a safe space because of people not only charging at them, coming into the building, rushing into the building. You have people who were armed. You have people who were chanting things like "Hang Mike Pence," all because they didn't like the results of the election. But I don't want you guys to forget about the fact that the very people who decided to do what they did that day in the Capitol riots were empowered with the pretty little lies that they were fed by Republican members of Congress, by people like Senator Ted Cruz, who decided, you know what? Why don't I pretend as if there's some legitimacy to the claim that the election was stolen from Donald Trump, even though he knew full well, as did every other Republican member of Congress, that Trump's campaign had lost dozens of court battles, more than 60 to be exact. And so in that moment, Lindsey Graham had that moment of clarity, right? The riot was fresh in his mind, he had just experienced it. But pretty soon after that, he changed his tone. Pretty soon after that, he did what he does best. He provided cover for Donald Trump. He provided cover for the rioters. Why did he do that? What changed his mind? Well, 2 days after the riots took place, on January 8th, Lindsey Graham was met at an airport by the MAGA crew. Let's take a look.
You traitor! You traitor! You traitor! You're a traitor! Lindsey Graham, you are a traitor to the country. You know it was rigged. You know it was rigged. You know it was rigged. You garbage human being.
You know it was rigged, you garbage human being. I mean, he's being swarmed by Trump supporters who don't like what he had to say on the Senate floor on January 6th following the riots. And so what did they do? They beat him to submission. In fact, later that night, all of a sudden he has a much more friendly tone toward Donald Trump, and in fact had urged Democrats to avoid doing something that would hold him accountable for the incitements of violence. Let's watch.
I want to thank the police who came to my aid. I know people are frustrated. I wanted President Trump to win so badly. I thought he was a consequential president. I think he made the world safer and more prosperous. I'm a constitutional conservative. I believe in federalism, even when I don't like the outcome. There's a process under our Constitution. I followed it the best I knew how. I stand by my vote. But now tonight, I'm calling on President-elect Biden to pick up the phone and call Nancy Pelosi and the squad to end the second impeachment.
Please don't impeach Trump. Please don't do it. Please just don't even start that process, because I'm terrified of Trump's base, and I'm hoping that this will be an opportunity for me to, make amends. Hopefully they'll forgive me for having the audacity to call the outcome of the election exactly what it was: a free and fair election that ended up electing Joe Biden, who, by the way, I mean, we're very critical of Joe Biden on this show. It's not like we were super excited that, the transition of power was gonna go from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. I mean, there was the added benefit of no longer having a complete moron in charge. But what I wanted to talk about in the context of this story, like the commentary I wanna provide actually has very little to do with Republicans and how they operate. I think we've had so many different examples of how easily they will cave to the extreme elements of their party. We've seen so many examples of Republican lawmakers who had terrible, critical things to say about Donald Trump, certainly during the 2016 primaries, and then all of a sudden turned around and not only enabled Donald Trump, but just kissed his ass, went phone banking for him in the case of Ted Cruz. No, I give you this example because I think it's a teachable moment for Democratic voters. Why is it that Republicans have made such a big deal over, in my opinion, the super mild protests that have occurred following the leak draft of the SCOTUS decision on overturning Roe v. Wade? Why are they freaking out so much, even though they have minimized the brutality and the violence that we've seen on the right? Why is it? Could it be that they understand how effective it could be when when the electorate is actually fired up about something, where they're not gonna shut up, where they're willing to protest, where they're willing to meet you at the airport and tell you exactly what they think about you? I mean, we have senators like Susan Collins, literally, this happened. She called the cops because pro-choice activists wrote a pro-choice message on the sidewalk in front of her home. She referred to it as, I believe it was debasing public property. It's chalk. And you know what the authorities told her? Yeah, we can't really do anything because this message isn't really threatening violence or anything like that against you. But they freak out, they panic. When the left gets fired up about something, when they want to voice their opinion, when they want to demonstrate, when they want to assemble, it's a big threat. And I've been wondering why. Is it just politics? Is it just because right-wing politicians want to paint left-wing voters as these dangerous people? Sure, I'm positive that has something to do with it. But I mean, they've experienced firsthand just how persuasive a fired up base can be. Just how easily a fired up base can take these slimy politicians and essentially get them to bend to their will. Now, look, I'm not advocating for violence, but I'm also not buying that the pro-choice protesters who gathered in front of Brett Kavanaugh's house were in any way an actual threat to Brett Kavanaugh or members of his family. There were a dozen of them. They were chanting. I didn't see a single example of anyone carrying out any type of act of violence. But maybe there's a possibility that they're concerned that, maybe if Democratic voters, maybe if left-wing voters started acting a little more, I don't know, engaged as right-wing voters, maybe Democrats would feel the urge to actually do something, to actually listen to what they want. There is a difference, I think, and this is not to place all the blame on activists or voters or whatever, but the right wing is very good at painting a picture, oftentimes an inaccurate image of the left. I think that they do a good job in getting people to just quiet down. And it doesn't help that Democrats engage in the same type of rhetoric, right? Oh, we can't have this, don't protest in this way, don't protest in that way. When we covered the story about the pro-choice protest, we gave the example of like Jen Psaki in the White House saying that they basically condemn anyone who would demonstrate in front of the Supreme Court justices' homes. But did you see the Trump administration put out those kinds of statements when right-wingers were protesting in actual violent ways? I mean, remember what Trump's response was to the Charlottesville protesters who were carrying the tiki torches and chanting things like the Jews will not replace us? He said, there's good people on both sides. Democrats, of course, like they'll go after their own, it's not a problem. But the point that I'm trying to make here is don't let them intimidate you and don't let them convince you that you need to back down. They're taking our rights away. It's starting with reproductive rights, but we know where this is going. They've been hyper-focused on the LGBTQ community on a state level. You think they're not gonna be focused on that in a federal way, through federal legislation, knowing full well that the Supreme Court doesn't really care about precedent. They're willing to overturn anything. So look, we need to have a better strategy. We need to think through how we can empower people who are doing the hard work on the ground, how we can organize with them. This is gonna be a decades-long project. The right wing in America, through the Federalist Society, has been chipping away at reproductive rights since Roe v. Wade was decided. So anyone who's delusional enough to think that all we need to do is snap our fingers or do enough protests and we'll get all of our rights given back to us, it's not gonna work that way. However, I do think that there is a difference between right-wing voters and left-wing voters, right? Republican voters versus Democrat voters. Because what do we notice when Democratic voters are critical of their representatives for not serving them, for not serving their best interests? Oh, how could you do that? It's irresponsible. What you're doing is super irresponsible because the midterms are coming up. And if you keep saying things like this, the Republicans are gonna get reelected. I don't know, I just don't see much of that on the right with right-wing voters. If we're not gonna hold them accountable for being failures and not serving our best interests, then they're not gonna serve our best interests. They're not gonna just decide out of nowhere to change their behavior out of the kindness of their hearts. I think we've had decades to prove that. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the Lindsey Graham thing. Is he a cuck? Yes, of course. But he admitted that during an interview that I always go back to when it comes to Lindsey Graham. When he spoke to the New York Times, he specifically said that he was kissing Donald Trump's ass because he wanted to remain relevant. For Lindsey Graham, this is all about Lindsey Graham. It's all about remaining in a position of power. And if that means sucking up to the most extreme elements of his party, he will do it. I want to be better than the right wing, but I do think that there are some lessons we can learn from right-wing voters and essentially how they ensure that they hold their elected leaders accountable for their failures, their perceived failures.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.